We know that magic is about increasing probabilities of our desires manifesting, but that it's not a guarantee. And I've been thinking recently about when magic isn't necessarily the best option to address a situation, but rather acceptance might be. So these reflections are a bit of a mixture about magic, spirituality, and psychology. And they're inspired by a video I watched recently by Brad Warner, who is an American Soto Zen teacher, author, and musician. And I recently only discovered his YouTube channel and listened to his book, Hardcore Zen, on Audible, which I'll link below. So in the video, he shares a famous quote by Master Dogen, who was a Zen Buddhist monk and founder of the Soto Zen School of Zen in Japan. And the quote is, "Just follow circumstances." And I will link to the book as well if you're interested in that. It is Master Dogen's Shinji Shobogenzo 301 Koan stories. And koans, as far as I can understand it, are stories that are used in Zen Buddhism to sort of go around logical reasoning and try to provoke enlightenment or insight. And I'll link to the particular video that Brad made about this because he goes into it in more detail. He has far more understanding about Zen than I do, as you might expect. So to give context to these thoughts around acceptance of one situation, one of the dialogues in the book is a discussion around a hypothetical situation where essentially the universe is destroyed, I think, and the questioner is asking whether he is also destroyed. And the monk said, "If this is true, I would like to follow circumstances." And there is some commentary in the book, and from what I understand, it is essentially saying is that man makes plans and God laughs, that popular phrase. We can plan what we want to do, but our plans may not work out the way we want, and we might find ourselves trying to change things that we can't change, whereas the most appropriate course of action in some situations might be to accept the reality of the situation, even if this isn't the reality that we would have chosen. And as a psychologist, this is something I see coming up a lot with the people I work with in terms of reality not aligning with what the person wants or hoped it would be. And on a more personal level, I found this to be the case in my life over the past few months when I was diagnosed with cancer in late 2025. And even though the prognosis is good, to say it's turned my life upside down would probably be a bit of an understatement. That this is not something I would have chosen for myself, but nonetheless, it's where I found myself. But it's taken me a little while to get to that point because initially at the beginning, I was understandably full of anxiety. I thought I was going to die. I thought I had literally weeks to live, even though that wasn't indicated at all. I've gone through, why is this happening to me? What have I done to deserve this? This shouldn't be happening. This is so unfair. And, I still have moments of that, and I think that is normal. I'm not punishing myself for that at all. I think that's all part of the grieving process, really. But what can happen, I think, is if it becomes an ingrained thought pattern, it can keep us stuck and stop us moving forward. So the phrase "just follow circumstances" is an acceptance of reality as it is in the moment, which makes sense in my mind. But like many things, it's not easy to do, especially when you're in the middle of it. And I suppose it's worth clarifying that acceptance isn't a resignation of the situation. It's not sort of saying, right, well, I might as well give up and not bother with anything anymore because I've just got to accept how this is. It's a very active position to take. It's a willingness to accept that this is the situation that you find yourself in. And what I've found with that is once I've been able to do that, it opens me up from a kind of a mental and emotional perspective to do what needs to be done. There are aspects of my treatment that I absolutely do not like having done. They're unpleasant, there's a lot of discomfort, and it's very upsetting, and I'd rather not have them. But the option to not have them, well, that's even worse. The outcome of not having these things done is worse. And so I have to do the things I need to do, even though I don't like them. And so when we're in a difficult situation, we might want to work some magic to try and change the situation. And whilst that's understandable, I don't think that's necessarily helpful. And I guess it comes down to discerning whether this is something you can really affect the outcome of with magic, or whether it's not, whether we need to do a bit more work in the mundane and or from a more psychological perspective, start to reframe things that will then influence our behaviours and our actions into things that are more helpful. Now, I suppose it's worth me saying that I have performed some magic in relation to my diagnosis. It is not to change, it's not to get rid of the cancer, because that's for conventional medicine to do whatever it's going to do and whatever happens with that. But the magic is to help with my treatment. And I have made a video, but I'm not going to put that video out just yet until I know a bit more about what's happening with my diagnosis, because I don't want to sort of jinx the magic. But that video will come out at some point. But in order for me to perform that magic, I had to come to an acceptance of what my reality was. Because I think if I'd have still been in the place where I wasn't accepting of it, I was perhaps in denial, or I was railing against it and full of anger at the injustice of it, I wonder whether I would have worked some magic which was not helpful, which came from a place of anger. And I think that's something we need to be careful of, is what is the driver for us working specific pieces of magic? Because for me personally, I feel that if it had come from a place of anger, I don't think that would have been an appropriate place to do it from. The magic I worked came from a place of wanting to give my treatment the best chance of being effective. I haven't shunned the treatment that I'm having, as unpleasant as it has been and will continue to be. But I thought, well, let's try and give it a helping hand and see what happens there. And I think magic and acceptance don't have to be mutually exclusive. It's not like it's an either or situation. What I found is that, or what my kind of theory is, and what I've found kind of reflecting on my own situation, is that when I've begun that process of acceptance, and I don't necessarily think we have to kind of be finished with acceptance or, have finished that process, because I'm still going through this process of acceptance even now. But I think once we've come to a point of acceptance where the reality has started to sink in and we're in a place of, okay, this is happening, I think then we're in a better position psychologically to do magic, which is more helpful. Because then what we're able to do is think about, okay, this is my reality. These are the things that I can do in the mundane. These are the actions I can take in the mundane to work with the situation I find myself in. Is there any form of magic that might also help the situation? Whereas I think if we come at the magic before we move into a place of acceptance, I can envisage it being a place where you're kind of like fighting desperately to think of, what magic can I work? And almost like if someone wants to work money magic because they're in debt and they're going to get kicked out of their house in the next week. I'm not saying there isn't magic that can help with that. I haven't personally done any magic like that. But I imagine to work magic when you're in that frame of mind, I don't know if that would cloud the magic, or you'd be working the magic in quite a confused or a unsettled mindset. Whereas I think acceptance can help bring a sense of perhaps calm and a bit more, I want to say stability, or like a settledness. It's not to say, by no means is my acceptance of my diagnosis mean I'm totally fine with it and I feel really settled with it all the time. But there's this sense when you do accept it, you kind of absorb it into yourself. You realise that this is how it is. And I do think that helps, not just with performing magic, but it helps to approach things in a different way, in a perhaps more level-headed way, from a less emotional place. And I'm not saying emotions are bad, but I think if we respond from an emotional place, that's not always helpful. That might lead us to respond in ways that aren't helpful to us or others or our overall situation. And so I suppose it's just highlighted how our psychology, how our mindset about things can help to inform the magic that we practice, and also whether we need to do a piece of magic at all. whether this process of acceptance or just following circumstances, as the quote goes, whether that means we focus on what we can do in the mundane. It may mean that we don't need to necessarily do magic at a particular stage. Maybe that comes further down the line. So I hope these reflections have been helpful for you. Let me know what you think, whether you think acceptance is a requirement for us to be able to perform magic that is perhaps coming from a more grounded place, if you like, whether we need that all the time or whether it's only in certain situations. I'd love to hear what you think. Take good care, be well, and I'll speak to you again soon.